If a young woman becomes famous for looking impossibly young, what happens when she keeps living long enough to look her age? Fashion rarely answers that question with patience. It answers with headlines, whispers, and the quiet brutality of treating a body like a product that has missed its launch window. Gemma Ward entered that system as a teenager from Perth and rose so fast that the climb barely looked real. Within a few years, she was on major covers, fronting elite campaigns, and being cast as the face of a new kind of beauty. Then, the same industry that had celebrated her began talking about her as if growing up had broken some unspoken contract. What followed was grief, retreat, reinvention, and a return that meant more because it happened on her terms. Gemma Ward did not spend years planning a career in fashion. She was a girl from Perth who went with friends to a televised modeling competition at a shopping center. She later said she was there partly to watch and partly to laugh at the spectacle. Then, scouts noticed her. The afternoon stopped being ordinary almost at once, and she knew it. Years later, Ward said the people running that event pushed her in front of the cameras and even forged her mother's signature on a consent form because she was too young to be there. The rise that followed was unusually fast, even by modeling standards. IMG moved quickly. Within about a year, Ward was in Milan meeting Miuccia Prada. She made her runway debut as a Prada exclusive and landed an early major Prada campaign photographed by Steven Meisel. In fashion, that kind of start does not happen by accident. It signals that the most powerful people in the room have already agreed that she is the next big thing. Ward made her Australian Fashion Week debut in 2003 at 15. By the next year, editors were writing about her as a new kind of presence. Her face was described as doll-like, otherworldly, strange, in a way fashion found magnetic. She did not simply fit the mood of that period. She helped define it. That look quickly became a template. Fashion attached Ward to the baby doll aesthetic so completely that her face became shorthand for an era. Big eyes, soft features, youth pushed almost to fantasy. It worked because she was so young. Hidden inside that success was a problem nobody had to say out loud. An image built around extreme youth comes with an expiration date, whether anyone admits it or not. From 2004 through 2007, Ward became one of the most visible models in the world. American Vogue put her on its September 2004 Models of the Moment cover. Teen Vogue later identified her as its first model cover girl. Forbes placed her among the world's top-earning models, listing her reported earnings at $3 million in 2007 and again in 2008. Those markers do not just show fame, they show commercial power. Her bookings did the rest. She worked with major photographers and moved through the highest level of fashion without looking like a temporary novelty. British Vogue later described her as one of the pioneers of the period's appetite for unusual beauty. W Magazine looked back on her as a model who defined a generation of fashion imagery. Vogue wrote that her arrival changed the business. The language was dramatic because the reaction had been dramatic. Still, it is important to separate success from influence. Success is easy to measure. Covers, campaigns, earnings, runways. Influence is harder to prove, but Ward's case is unusually clear because editors kept describing her as the center of a shift. Her look helped push fashion away from one set of beauty standards and toward something more fragile, more ethereal, more adolescent in spirit. That was the gift and the trap. The more the industry used her face to embody a trend, the more tightly it tied her value to staying inside that image. Other models could age into different phases of their careers. Ward had been cast as the visual language of a moment. Once a person becomes the symbol of a look, any visible change starts getting treated as a deviation. The language used around Ward during those peak years says a lot about the industry that elevated her. Editors did not simply call her beautiful. They kept reaching for words that made her sound unreal, alien, elfin, doll-like. From the outside, those descriptions may read as compliments. Inside fashion, they also functioned as instructions. They told photographers how to shoot her, stylists how to dress her, and casting directors what kind of mood her presence was supposed to create. A career can get narrowed by praise just as easily as it can be narrowed by criticism. Once the industry agrees on the story attached to a model's face, that story begins shaping everything around her. Ward arrived at bookings as more than Gemma Ward. She carried an aesthetic idea editors and brands found commercially useful. You can see that in the sheer spread of her work: campaigns, covers, runway seasons, the constant sense that her face could make a picture feel current. Success alone does not explain it. She became shorthand. One glance and the viewer was meant to understand the whole mood of the moment. This is why later backlash hit so hard. The same framing that made her valuable also made her vulnerable. Fashion had invested heavily in a version of her that looked suspended in youth. Once that illusion started to fade, the industry did not respond with curiosity or patience. It responded as if something had been taken from it. There is a strange cruelty in becoming hugely successful before you are old enough to understand the system that is using you. The schedule alone can do damage. Fashion weeks in New York, London, Milan, and Paris. Campaign shoots in between. Editorial work, fittings, travel, constant scrutiny. The pace leaves little room to build a private self separate from the public image. Ward's career at the top was real, but it was also compressed. In most fields, 3 or 4 years is a beginning. In fashion, especially then, it could feel like an entire life cycle. By the time she was 18 and 19, Ward had already spent years being photographed, styled, cast, praised, and monitored at the highest level. That pace can flatten time. It can make a young person seem older in professional terms, while leaving her very young in the ways that still count. For Ward, the pressure came with an added condition. The industry did not simply want her to work. It wanted her to keep matching the image it had built around her. The baby doll framing was still attached to her face. Every appearance carried an unspoken question. Does she still look like the fantasy people bought into? Nothing about that pressure was visible from a runway seat. From the outside, Ward still looked untouchable. Inside the system, though, the conditions were already there for a reversal. A career built on a specific fantasy can turn unstable the moment reality appears on stage. That moment came in Paris in 2007. There was also a practical side to Ward's fame. She became rich, famous, and influential before she was old enough to have much real protection from the forces around her. Money can help. Fame can help too. Neither gives a teenager much leverage against an industry built on access, approval, and speed. That gap between status and power is one of the reasons her story still lands. She had status early. She did not have power early. A person can be on the cover of a magazine and still have very little control over the interpretation of her own image. A person can be earning millions and still be emotionally exposed in ways that are hard for outsiders to see. Ward's early years in fashion were filled with applause, but applause can hide a lot. It can hide exhaustion. It can hide confusion. It can hide the cost of being turned into a projection before you have finished becoming yourself. The industry rarely pauses long enough to ask what a teenager can absorb before the answer becomes dangerous. That is part of why the later moral panic around her body feels so revealing. It exposed what had always been there. Fashion's affection had conditions. It was warm while she embodied the look it needed. The moment she drifted away from that image, the warmth disappeared and the conditions became visible. In October 2007, Ward walked in Chanel's Spring 2008 ready-to-wear show at the Grand Palais in Paris. The collection included a denim bikini. Vogue's runway coverage and Getty's archived photos lock that sequence in place clearly. So does everything that followed. The garment itself was beside the point. It was the reaction. Fashion outlets and tabloids began talking about Ward's body with a tone that was harsh, mocking, and startlingly casual. A feature later discussed by The Cut included an anonymous editor saying she looked unfamiliar and describing her in openly cruel terms. The point was clear, even when the wording changed from outlet to outlet. The industry had decided that a 19-year-old no longer matched the teenage image it had once celebrated. This was body shaming, but it was also something slightly different. It was the punishment of maturity. Ward had not done anything except continue existing in a body that did what bodies do. Fashion reacted as though that change were a betrayal. W Magazine later pointed to early fashion blogs and comment sections as part of what made that period especially brutal. The ridicule did not stay in closed rooms. It spread online, where strangers could pile on and preserve the whole thing in public view. That widened the damage. Cruelty that might once have lived in industry gossip now had an audience and a searchable record. One Australian paper later published a beach photo under the headline, "Role Model." It is one of those details that says too much all at once. By then, the judgment had spilled beyond fashion. She had become content for public humiliation. What happened here is clear enough without repeating the cruelty in detail. The real point is how quickly the mood changed once Ward looked less like the teenage ideal fashion had packaged and sold. The same culture that celebrated her started treating that natural change like a failure. That sudden change in treatment is the point. Fashion has always been harsh, so it is worth asking why Ward's backlash remains memorable. One reason is timing. She came up at the edge of a media transition. The old world of print gossip and the newer world of online commentary overlapped almost perfectly with her rise and retreat. That meant criticism no longer stayed where only insiders could hear it. It escaped into public circulation at a scale earlier models had not faced in quite the same way. Another reason is that the backlash exposed an ugly contradiction in plain view. Ward had become famous for a face the industry described as childlike. Then it punished her for looking older. The underlying logic was impossible to miss once it was fully visible. Fashion had wanted the fantasy of youth without the reality of aging. That is why the Chanel moment keeps returning in stories about her. It was no scandal in the usual sense. There was no crime, no feud, no dramatic confession. There was only a body on a runway and an industry showing how quickly it could turn normal development into public failure. The sequence speaks for itself. She walked the show. The commentary followed. The language turned cruel. The media fixation spread. The record is already strong enough without pushing it any further. While that backlash was unfolding, Ward was also dealing with a private loss that did not stay private for long. She had been seeing Heath Ledger. British Vogue reported that they met in New York in the months before his death and spent Christmas together in Perth with each other's families. He died on January 22, 2008. Ward later spoke about him with unusual restraint. She described him as someone who lived from the heart and took his work seriously enough to fight for it. She also said he encouraged her interest in acting. Together, those remarks give the relationship a human shape instead of leaving it as a tragic headline. The timing made everything heavier. A young woman already under public scrutiny lost someone close to her, and the media still kept circling her appearance. W Magazine later wrote that some outlets moved directly from covering Ledger's death to publishing pictures of Ward and criticizing her body. Grief and scrutiny arrived together. That overlap is central to the emotional logic of her withdrawal. It is not necessary to turn Ledger's death into a larger subplot than it was in Ward's life, and it would be a mistake to use it for melodrama. The pressure comes from the collision itself. Public criticism was already underway. Then, personal tragedy entered the same window of time and made an already unstable period much harder to carry. Around this period, acting began to occupy more space in her life. The grief stayed with her, so did the pressure. Acting offered another direction. Ward later said the difference between modeling and acting ran deep. In one, the image is the product. In the other, the image serves a character. As fashion grew harsher, that difference became harder to ignore. By August 2008, stories were circulating that Ward had retired. She pushed back publicly. In a statement carried by The Cut, she said she was taking time off to rest and be with friends and family. Then she cut through the noise with one line, "I'm only 20 for God's sakes!" That sentence did several things at once. It corrected the record. It rejected the idea that a pause meant an ending. Most of all, it restored proportion. Fashion and tabloid coverage had been treating her as if her career had already run its course. She reminded everyone that she was 20. Years later, Ward gave a fuller picture of what that retreat involved. In W Magazine, she spoke about writing down the cruel things people were saying about her. She also described anxiety, depression, self-medication, and an eating disorder she said had existed from a very young age. That distinction is important. She did not say the fashion backlash created everything. She said it compounded what was already there and made it harder to manage. She also later spoke about getting treatment at an Australian health retreat. That gives this period a clear shape. She pulled back for treatment. She was trying to recover, and from the outside, recovery often looks quiet. It can look uneventful. It can look like someone simply stepping out of view. Ward later described that stretch of her life in careful terms: reassessment, treatment, strain on her mental health, and a need to step away from public life. That language already says plenty. She did not dramatize it. What she described was serious, difficult, and deeply personal without needing anything added to it. The retreat did not mean her life had stopped. It meant she stopped moving at the pace fashion had demanded from her. There is a difference between stepping away and disappearing. Fashion had trained people to treat constant visibility as proof that someone was still in motion. Once she pulled back from that pace, many read it as absence. Her life was still unfolding, just outside the system that had been feeding on her visibility. Recovery during this period seems to have been slow and uneven, which is often how recovery unfolds in real life. She stepped back because the pace had become too much. She sought treatment. She put distance between herself and public scrutiny. She began dealing with things that had been building for years. None of that comes with the neat shape people often expect from a public return. Ward also said she was not ready to speak about that time while she was still inside it. There is something plain and revealing in that. Her image had already been consumed in public for years. Waiting until she had some distance before speaking was one way to keep that part of her life from being handled the same way. When she later returned, the years away had already changed how people saw her. The gap had created curiosity. Her later comments gave that period a clearer outline. Not every detail surfaced. Not every private struggle was named. Enough came through to show that the retreat, the distance, and the years away were part of how she kept going. Ward's move into acting began before the collapse of her modeling image. The interest had already been there. What changed was the role acting began to play in her life once fashion became hostile. Her screen work spread across several years. She appeared in The Strangers and The Black Balloon in 2008. Later came Pirates of the Caribbean, On Stranger Tides in 2011, and The Great Gatsby in 2013. Some of those roles were small. The point is continuity. While fashion treated her as absent, she was still working. Acting offered distance. It also offered a different relationship to visibility. A model's body is often treated as the message. An actor's body is part of a performance built around somebody else's story. That can sound like a small distinction, but for Ward it mattered. The fashion system had spent years telling her what her appearance meant. Film created space where appearance was no longer the whole argument. She did not disappear. She kept working, moved into a different kind of work, and slowly rebuilt a sense of self outside the runway's constant demands. The industry sometimes reads that kind of shift as betrayal. Ward's case was no exception. W Magazine noted that parts of fashion reacted to her acting work as though she were stepping away from something she owed them. That reaction reveals how possessive the system can become when it decides a face belongs to an era. In 2013, Ward re-signed with IMG. The bigger public moment came a year later. On September 18, 2014, she opened Prada's Spring 2015 show in Milan. Teen Vogue treated it as a major comeback. British Vogue described the reaction as triumphant. W Magazine later recalled the surge of attention around it. The meaning was plain. Gemma Ward was back on the runway, and fashion knew exactly what that meant. The symbolism was powerful because Prada had been there at the beginning. Her debut as a Prada exclusive helped launch her first rise. Opening Prada again, years after the retreat, made the return feel less like a new chapter than a reclaimed one. The house that had first anointed her was now part of the moment that reintroduced her. The difference was control. She was older, a mother, and more deliberate about work. Later interviews show that clearly. Ward spoke about structure, health, meditation, and balance. She did not describe the second phase of her career as a race to recover lost ground. She described it as a way of living that no longer required total surrender to the pace that had hurt her before. That is what makes the comeback meaningful. It carried more than the mood of a victory lap. It was proof that the version of her the industry once discarded had not been the lesser version. It was the adult version, the one with boundaries, the one who could say yes more carefully and walk away when needed. In Who, What, Where, Ward gave advice that now reads like the clearest summary of what she learned. Focus on the long game. That line works because it is practical. It does not pretend the system has softened. It does not promise that talent protects anyone from harm. It just insists that speed is not the only way to have a life. When Ward returned, she did not return as the girl fashion had first crowned. That is the point. She returned with experience, with a family life, with a stronger sense of what she needed to stay well, and with a willingness to talk openly about the cost of chasing impossible standards. Later interviews show that shift clearly. She spoke about the damage caused by perfectionism and the pressure to produce quickly while young. She spoke about balance without making it sound cute or easy. Balance, in her telling, never came off as a lifestyle accessory. It was protection. That perspective changes the emotional meaning of the Prada return. If the first Prada moment announced her to the industry, the second announced that the industry no longer had full possession of her. She could participate without handing over everything. She could be visible without treating visibility as the center of life. That is also why her advice carries more force than the usual survivor language people attach to comeback stories. Focus on the long game is not motivational wallpaper. It is a direct answer to the speed that shaped her early career. It pushes against the whole structure that made her famous in the first place. The return, then, is not simply about being welcomed back. It is about returning with a different set of priorities than the ones the industry prefers. That makes the story larger than fashion. It becomes a story about what happens when a public identity breaks, and the person inside it decides not to rebuild it the old way. Gemma Ward's story is often reduced to a rise, a fall, and a comeback. That version is neat, but it hides the part worth remembering. The fashion industry did not simply lose interest in her. It built enormous value around her youth, treated ordinary adulthood as damage, and let public cruelty do part of the disciplining. Then, years later, it greeted her return with admiration, as though the middle section had been a pause instead of a wound. Ward's own reflections cut through that false neatness. She has spoken about perfection as a trap, about public judgment, about the need to protect mental health, and about building a life large enough to exist beyond other people's projections. Those ideas carry weight because they came after she had lived the opposite. There is a final reason her return stays with people. The first time she entered fashion, the pace was set by everyone else. Scouts pushed, agencies moved, designers decided, editors framed. The second time, she chose the timing herself. Same woman, same industry, completely different balance of power. That shift is the real ending. Not vindication and not revenge. Choice. People remembered the face. They also had to reckon with the woman who had returned carrying a harder understanding of fame, work, and survival. She returned older, steadier, and harder to use. The teenager who got swept into fashion became an adult who understood exactly what that world could do and still found a way to re-enter without handing it all of herself. That is a harder kind of triumph, and it lasts longer.